This week wasn't about attacking trucking, and it wasn't about attacking owners, where some of you might have felt like this. It wasn't about tearing down companies or even picking sides. This whole week was about control, who has it and who doesn't, and why drivers keep feeling like the rules never work in their favor. Because if you ever asked yourself, why does this industry feel stacked? Why do the same problems keep coming back? Um, it's not random, and it's not because drivers aren't working hard enough. I really get tired of hearing that from people. Drivers need to work harder. You see, most drivers spend their time fighting downstream problems. You guys keep fighting things like pay, miles, dispatch, settlements, being 1099, yes, W 2, bad leases that you guys get into. But by the time you're fighting all of those battles, the real decisions have already been made. The rules of trucking are decided way upstream, long before a driver ever touches the wheel. And that's something that you need to understand. And when you look upstream, one name shows up over and over and over. And this is the American Trucking Associations. ATA doesn't just show up to meetings. They don't just give opinions. ATA doesn't just influence policy, it authors the framework that large carriers operate on the inside. They help shape what trucking rules look like before those rules ever reach drivers. And this is where people really started getting sideways. Okay. ATA is not calling drivers. They're not collecting lease contracts from truck stops. They're not reviewing settlements sent in by individual drivers. That's not how this works. ATA gets its data, its studies, and its industry feedback from member companies. And that means large carriers. Okay. Most of the data they get comes from large carriers. There may be some other ways, but this is big fleets, companies with compliance departments, companies with lawyers, companies with lobbying budgets. That's right. Listen to the last part, lobbying budgets. So when ATA says this is what the trucking industry needs, what they usually mean is this is what large carriers say works for them. That doesn't mean one company is secretly writing laws, okay? It means the business models used by the big trucking companies become the baseline for what regulators see as normal trucking. And that's a big problem. And this is the question that people keep asking all the time. You guys ask me this a lot. If lease purchase abuse is real, if misclassification is real, if settlements are confusing on purpose, why don't regulators step in? And this is where a lot of people get it wrong. It's not because regulators are stupid, it's not because they don't care, and it's not because nobody has complained. See, you guys need to understand when regulators look at trucking, they don't start with truck drivers. They talk to trade groups, they talk to industry representatives, they talk to organizations that claim to speak for trucking as a whole. And ATA is one of the loudest voices in that room. That's why I was glad to see the government actually make a task force and go out here and find out how many drivers had been burned in lease purchases. You see, the ATA brings data, the ATA brings studies, and the ATA brings industry feedback. But that feedback mostly comes from large carriers and not from truck drivers. So the picture regulators see is built around how big fleets operate, not how drivers experience the system day to day. So when lease purchase programs are common among large carriers, they don't look like a red flag. What it does is it makes it look normal. When classification lines are blurry, they don't look abusive. You see, what happens is they start looking flexible. And when settlements are hard to understand, they just don't look deceptive. They look very complicated. It's not the way trucking's supposed to be, right? That's why these issues aren't challenged aggressively. Not because they don't exist, but because the people benefiting from them are part of the group that's defining what normal looks like. Drivers keep asking, why won't anyone fix this? And it's a very, very hard answer. It is. It's very tough. The system isn't being described from the driver's seat. That's the first problem. Drivers aren't the data set. The carriers are. And to me, I feel like that's where we're failing at most. That's why lease purchases stay lopsided. That's why the classification stays very fuzzy. And that's why settlements, continue to stay confusing. It's not chaos. It's a system working exactly the way it was built to work. Okay. And since we're talking about who speaks for trucking, let me clear something else up really quick, kind of off the topic. But people ask me why I wear t-shirts all the time. It's simple. I'm a normal person. I'm a prior truck driver. And even when I was the COO of a trucking company, this is how I dressed. I think it's funny. Someone made a comment the other night about the way that I dress, and I never put on a suit to feel important. I never tried to look like something that I wasn't, because the clothes don't change the truth. The experience does. Okay. I've sat in the driver's seat for 15 years, and I've sat in the boardroom. And what I learned real quickly is the suit doesn't mean you understand trucking better. All right. So don't ever let anyone ever make you feel less because of a suit. Let's get back to this part two. Let's talk about why drivers feel trapped. So this is why drivers argue about cent per mile, why they argue about W-2 versus 1099, and why they bounce company to company. All of those fights happen after the rules are already written. The game's decided before the driver ever shows up. You see, drivers don't lose because they don't work hard. They lose because the system was built around someone else's advantage. Control Week wasn't about blaming companies. It was about blaming regulators. It was about understanding where control really, truly lives. Because if you don't know who writes these rules, you're going to spend your whole career stuck playing by them. And that's what we got to change. We need to get a voice, we need to get loud, and we need to let people know that we know exactly what's happening.